Welcome to You Decide. I'm your host, Errol Lewis. We are now in the month of June, meaning there are fewer than 25 days until the June 24th Democratic primary for mayor of New York City, and the race is heating up. The ads are hitting the airwaves. Candidates are receiving and spending millions of dollars in matching funds from the Campaign Finance Board. The momentum is building. One of the names making waves is Zohran Mamdani. He was once considered a long shot. Mamdani has emerged, though, as the surprise success story of the Democratic primary. Few political insiders could have predicted that by this point he would be sitting in second place, right behind Andrew Cuomo, in a race that gets tighter by the day. Mamdani has run a high-energy grassroots campaign. He's everywhere on social media. We were talking in the newsroom, actually, totally anecdotal, but one of us who lives in Queens, two of us who live in Brooklyn, said the only people who have knocked on our door in this cycle were Mamdani's people. It's anecdotal, but, he's on social media. The message is clear. He's out-hustled much of the field. Some have compared him with the youth and energy of the campaign to that of AOC back in 2018. The big question is, can he close the deal? Can he close the gap with Cuomo, who, by the way, is, I think, literally twice his age? I haven't spoken with Zohran Mamdani in a while. It's safe to say he's doing very well, but he's made a little time for us little people. So let's dive right in. Great to see you.
Great to see you as always, Errol.
So now, this is only your fourth campaign, and it's the first one that's bigger than an assembly district. What has this experience of running citywide been like?
It's been incredible. This campaign is a love letter to this city. This is the city that I moved to when I was 7 years old. It's the city I grew up in. It's the city where I got my citizenship. And it's a city where we know there are so many cities in one. And to run to represent all of it means the opportunity to do calisthenics with 80-year-old grandmas in Brownsville to start the day, and then go to Friday prayers in Richmond Hill and crisscross across the 5 boroughs that for too many New Yorkers have been places that have been forgotten by our city's leadership. And this is a message for each one of them, a message for a city they can actually afford.
There's a little bit of news shortly before we met. Politico reported that at least initially your supporters in the DSA, Democratic Socialists of America, figured you had no chance at winning, but your campaign would be a good way to spread the group's message, get new members. Candidates always see it a little differently. Have you been running to win? There's a lot easier ways to do those things than to put yourself out there. So I don't know if this was ever part of your plan.
No, I've been clear from the beginning. This is a campaign to win.
Okay.
And as we've surprised people, as we've made statements, we are always clear that that's insufficient in and of itself. Mm-hmm. This is a campaign that we not only are planning to win, but actually we're confident of doing so. Because 8 weeks ago, Andrew Cuomo was winning the final round by 40 points. 2 weeks ago, we cut it to 20. Earlier last week, we brought it down to 12, and then a few days later, we brought it down to less than 9 points. It's a single-digit race with around 3 weeks to go, and we're right where we want to be.
Okay. Some people, I'll come back to that in a minute. Some people get confused about party loyalty. You're endorsed by the DSA. I think they were first, actually, publicly. You recently were ranked number 1 by the Working Families Party, and of course, you are officially a candidate for the Democratic nomination. So, how does that work? If you don't win the Democratic line for some reason, would you be supporting the winner of the primary?
I am focused solely on winning that primary on June 24th, and I'm confident in our ability to do so. And ultimately, I'm running as a proud Democrat and someone who wants to bring this party back to its roots of serving working class people across the city and across this country. And I think we have many examples of leaders who have done so in the past, but sadly we can't find them in our current mayor or our former governor.
So let me ask it another way. Have you, as a condition or during your discussions with the Working Families Party and the DSA, told them that you plan to run in November no matter what?
No, there's been no commitment made because ultimately our focus is on June 24th.
Okay, fine. Is this a generational fight? Cuomo is much older. I think he's twice your age. How old are you?
I'm 33 years old.
Yeah, he's literally twice your age.
Yeah, he will be 72 by the end of his first term.
What do you think is going on there? Is that relevant to this race, or you just happen to be a much younger guy?
I think it is relevant. I think this is a question of whether we want to usher in the same old leadership we've had, the same leadership that was the architect of the crises New Yorkers are living through, or whether we want a new generation. And what that choice is also a choice between is a politics of the past of big money and small vision, or a politics of the future that puts working people first. And we need to turn the page on Eric Adams. And when we do so, understand that Cuomo is running for Adams' second term. It's the same donors, the same corruption, the same agenda.
Oh, tell me more about that. I mean, because the two of them have exchanged some words. They don't seem to be terribly fond of each other.
They have now, but I think for a long time, what they have shown is a willingness to keep putting their thumb on the scale against working class New Yorkers. I mean, you think about the greatest powers of being the mayor of the city. One of them is that you set the rent increase or lack thereof for close to 2.5 million New Yorkers who live in rent-stabilized housing. Mayor Adams has increased at 9%, is proposing an increase on top of that by close to 8%. Andrew Cuomo has made it clear that he would continue that policy of rent hikes. He went to the Real Estate Board of New York, embracing them and saying that he regretted the 2019 HSTPA, one of the most important fights for tenant rights across the city that has kept New Yorkers in their homes. And for him, ultimately, the importance is not people, it's profit.
Well, when it comes to that question of whether there should be a rent freeze, there's the immediate question, and you've made clear, I think you were one of only a couple of candidates who've said, if I'm elected, there will be a rent freeze, period. Let's open the lens a little bit. It will always be politically advantageous to promise a rent freeze because most voters are renters, right? At some point, you have to sort of think it through economically in a way that sort of takes into account rising prices. How would that work if you're the mayor?
Absolutely. Well, you know, it's interesting. You'd think it would be politically advantageous, but the issue is that for many of these politicians, they are bankrolled by the real estate lobby. And so they are hesitant to take any kind of decision that would come at the expense of their donors. This commitment to a rent freeze is also a reflection of the economic realities. We are speaking about a tenant population that has the median household income of $60,000 a year, a set of landlords that have seen their profits increase by 12%, and the ability for relief within that. And ultimately, however, we need a mayor who understands that the affordability crisis also extends to homeowners and landlords. Mm-hmm. And there are things within our power to ensure that we lower some of those costs. I'll give you an example where Eric Adams raised the water bill to the highest it's been in 13 years. Eric Adams sided with Con Edison when they wanted to raise gas and electric by $65 a month. I know that because I was in that negotiation, and I was one of the few who opposed it, while Mayor Adams went with Walmart to support Con Edison. And finally, property taxes. Property taxes, we know, are unfair, they're inequitable. Adams said that he would address them within 100 days of taking office. He's instead sought to defend them in court and lost time and time again. Mm-hmm. And these are also a number of the different ways in which we can ensure that we're bringing costs down for everyone and understanding affordability as a crisis for every New Yorker.
I guess what I'm getting at is, do you see that as a negotiation? Whether you're talking about, utility, housing costs, or, anything that America can actually influence or control, is that, sort of one-sided forever? Meaning, you tell landlords your profits are going to be 2% and that's all it's ever going to be? Or is there some other kind of process?
I think ultimately we need to make decisions that reflect our reality. And the decision that I've committed to is freezing the rent for the next 4 years and in doing everything in my power to ensure costs are low for everyone. And part of it is an understanding that raising the water bill as a means to raise revenue for the city of New York is regressive in a manner that is not befitting leadership of this city. We need to actually raise revenue, but do so in a manner that's progressive. And that's why our proposals to not only fund our economic agenda and start to Trump-proof our city have been twofold. The first being raising the top corporate tax rate of the state to match that of New Jersey, going from 7.25 to 11.5%. That raises $5 billion. And the second is to raise the personal income tax on the top 1% of New Yorkers who make $1 million a year or more, by a flat 2% increase. Both of these things leave New Yorkers and those corporations paying less in taxes than they did before the first Trump administration. Mm-hmm. They also raise the kind of money, $9 billion, of which an additional $1 billion comes from good government reforms, that can not only pay for this agenda, but also increase the quality of life for all New Yorkers, because you hear that again and again, that people are feeling the lack of that quality in the services the city is providing. And part of it is because we've had a mayor who's uninterested in both in governance, but also in delivering excellent service through city government.
the changes that you're talking about that would have to be approved by the state legislature, of which you are a member.
Yes.
What's your sense of the likelihood of that? I mean, the governor has said more or less publicly that those kind of proposals are going to be dead on arrival.
You know, the governor has indicated reticence around personal income taxes. There has been a greater openness around the question of corporate taxes. But what I've seen in the legislature, who are equal partners in this endeavor, is a continued appetite for these kinds of taxes. You can find it in every year's one house budget, where each house of the legislature puts forward its vision. It includes an increase in corporate taxes, an increase in personal income taxes. And in my first year in Albany, I went through a similar fight where we were fighting to fully fund the very public schools that Andrew Cuomo had starved. And we were fighting to tax billionaires and corporations, his very donors. And we overcame his objections. We raised taxes on them. We raised about $4 billion in new annual revenue, and we're able to fund those schools. And so that's an experience that is one that I think of often as to both what is possible and what is necessary.
Have you talked with any corporate leaders? Depending on the topic, some of them are really quite open to some of what you're suggesting here.
Yes, I have. And that's been part of my commitment to speak to each and every New Yorker, especially those who are skeptical. Because for too long in our politics, there's this sense that, you got to be with me on everything in order to even engage with me. And I think we need to go back to what Mayor Koch used to say, which is if you agree with me on 9 out of 12 issues, vote for me. 12 out of 12, see a psychiatrist. You have to have that openness. And I've had those sit downs and we've talked through disagreements. And I think ultimately one point of agreement, however, is that whether you're a corporate leader, whether you're a small business owner, whether you are a worker, you know the affordability crisis is affecting the city. And from the vantage point of those corporate leaders, one of their biggest issues is how they can retain and attract a workforce in a city that's become the most expensive in the United States.
Yeah.
And when I make it clear that this is not a revenue proposal in and of itself to tax the rich. This is a revenue proposal to fund these kinds of programs which transform the quality of life in this city. I mean, if you are a tenant, to have the stability of knowing that you will pay the same thing you pay this year next year, it lets you know that you can afford it. If you're going to raise a kid in this city, to know that you can take a $25,000 a year expense off your back, that transforms what's possible here. And I think even, when I talk about making buses fast and free, it's important to acknowledge this was an idea that was introduced by Michael Bloomberg, decades ago in speaking about crosstown buses, because it's not just economic relief. It's also the quality of that ride, that you can get on at every part of the bus, the back door, the front door, that you actually see a decrease in assaults on bus drivers, 38.9% in the fare-free bus pilot I won, and that you also see a real increase in accessibility. Because when we go for these kinds of means-tested programs that say certain New Yorkers qualify for certain subsidy, you'll see you lose about 50% of the eligible population. But when you make it free at point of service, you are serving far more New Yorkers, and you're not getting trapped in the same bureaucracy that failed those New Yorkers.
On the buses, the crosstown buses always made sense. That, what they call dwell time, meaning when you're sitting there waiting for people to pay their fare or making sure people are getting on and off, that's where you lose a lot of time, and it makes crosstown traffic that much worse. As a general proposition for every bus, I think it starts to look a little bit different. And I wanted to ask you about, I was looking at, where has this ever been tried and what happened with it. And I think it was Portland where they tried it in 2012, and then they had to shut the program down. They said it attracted a lot of rowdy teenagers and homeless people. And, for most New Yorkers, you'd be like, yeah, that sounds about right. How would you deal with that?
I think what gives me such confidence is that we won that fare-free bus pilot here in New York City, thanks to my and Deputy Majority Leader Mike Gianaris is winning it in the 2023 budget in Albany. And we made one bus route free in each of the 5 boroughs. And we heard many of these concerns. And ultimately, we didn't actually see them play out. We didn't see any increase in homelessness on these buses. We didn't see any increase in any kind of incidents, be it with rowdy teenagers or whomever else. We actually saw a decrease in assaults on bus drivers, 38.9%, an increase in ridership of up to 38%, and actually a decrease in congestion because 11% of the new riders got out of a car they were driving, taxi they were taking, got on the bus. And what was so exciting for me to see is that oftentimes when you talk about public transit, you talk about the importance of it, it's framed as if it's an issue that is ideological in some way. But in fact, we saw that some of the greatest success of this program was in Staten Island. And I heard actually from a supporter of this campaign, they first heard about me because they used to get on that very bus. And I think, what you're pointing to about dwell time, when you look at Mayor Wu in Boston, she made Route 28 and a few other routes free. On Route 28, the dwell time went down by 23% because I love my aunties and my uncles. And I also know that when you're standing in that line, people are looking for their change. They're looking for their Metro card. It is a different experience when you can just get on and get off. And I remember going on the BX18A, the Bronx bus we made free on the first day. And there was a nurse who got on the bus and she reached for her Metro card in her purse. And the driver said, it's free. She said, what do you mean? He said, it's free. They made this route free. And she looked at him and then she just danced down the bus to her seat. And
do the electric slide, right?
Because imagine you're a New Yorker. When do you get that break?
Sure.
When do you get someone who tells you, hey, we've got you? And I think that's what we need city government to do. We need a city government that takes care of its people and surprises them with the fact that it's sincere about it.
Was there anything you thought Cuomo was good at? Your time did overlap with him to a certain extent.
It's hard to say. As soon as I came into Albany, he was found to have sent 15,000 New Yorkers to their deaths through his COVID-era nursing home policy. I was one of the first assembly members to call for his impeachment prior to the sexual harassment allegations. And
I take it you've never spoken to him personally about that or anything else?
I've never spoken to him in my life. I've only seen him 3 times. And part of that is a function of him running a campaign likely from the suburbs. We do not know where he lives. We do not know where he is.
But even in the Capitol, I mean, you were working in the same building.
Never saw him. And I've seen and spoken to the governor, the current governor, Hochul, many a time. Mr. Cuomo, I did not. And I think it's, his team made the assessment, which was a correct one at the beginning of this campaign, that the more that New Yorkers and the press see of Andrew Cuomo, the less they like. So they want to hide him. I was at a church yesterday. Every candidate polling above 5% was invited. We were all there. We were told all the candidates would sit in 2 pews. And I sat there with Controller Lander, Speaker Adams, former Controller Stringer, and Mr. Cuomo was supposed to be the first speaker, and we looked around and he wasn't there. And we went through the program, and as soon as it got to his point, he arrived. Didn't sit, went straight to the stage. And what I heard after is that he had been driving around in a car, waiting until the exact moment so that he did not have to see anyone beyond that which was required. And that is not someone who's fit to be the mayor of this city. You might not like the questions. You might not like the people, but you're the mayor. You have to engage with all of it. And to think you can run a city from within a bubble is something that is so out of step with what the city needs. And I think that's what we're going to see on June 24th.
When I think of, I should not pass up this opportunity to renew our invitation to Andrew Cuomo to come talk to me on this podcast, on television, or anywhere else.
Come on.
I've talked with his folks. I don't know that it's going to happen. But
do they talk or do they just yell?
No, they don't. I mean, they don't yell at me. They yell at some people. They don't yell at me. But I'll tell you what it is, as far as I can tell, is it's pure strategy. It's pure strategy. They're like, we're ahead in the polls. We're ahead in the fundraising. Why should we expose ourselves, right? And I give a version of what you just said. I'm like, well, it's just not the right thing to do, right? Yeah. Because how you run is how you govern. You among other things, you're not just trying to win a race. You're also, creating the basis on which you're going to govern. Yeah. They don't see it that way, and they can say, Andrew Cuomo has won, been involved in either as a candidate or as a campaign manager in something like 15 statewide races. We think we know something about this business, Mr. Journalist. And I'm like, okay, but you do what you do you, but
the mayor of New York City is a fundamentally different job. And to think of this in many ways as a rebound after having to resign in disgrace, it is offensive to New Yorkers. And I think what that campaign is facing now is a reality that the way they've run this race has left them now in just a single-digit lead. And he would rather run a red light than answer a question from a journalist. His team would rather call those journalists protesters than acknowledge that he's hiding from them. And with these 20-odd days left, they're trying to breathe oxygen into something where they've been running away from it for so long.
There's, I'm sure you've heard them too. There's rumors that there's panic within that camp and so forth. But look, if your theory is right, it'll play out the way you want. Let's talk a little bit about your personal story.
Actually, let me ask you just before we get there.
Yes.
When was the last time you spoke to Andrew Cuomo?
It's been a while. Longer than it should have been. Longer than it should have been. I think probably, because it's podcast related, I don't normally talk about this kind of stuff, but I think the last time I spoke to him personally one-on-one was when I asked him to participate in a 3-part series we did about his father. We did a documentary podcast series. And he said he would participate, and that never happened, but, it would have been nice. But look, I've been doing this for a long time. I've been doing this my whole adult life. People say all kinds of things. You politicians, you're aware of this. Politicians will often say things that they absolutely don't mean, right? And I don't take it personally, but it's,
But there's a track record there.
I don't take it personally. I also don't forget about it. Yeah. Let's talk about your personal story. You're born in Uganda, which I love as a story. Tell us how that unfolded. And you spent a fair amount of your time. I get it that as a candidate for mayor, you want to talk about your roots here in the city, but you got roots all over the place.
I do. Yeah. I was born in Kampala, Uganda, in East Africa. I was born in Zambia Hospital. And that's, I spent the better part of 5 years of my life in Kampala. My father then got a job at the University of Cape Town. We moved to South Africa for a few years just after the fall of apartheid there. And then we moved here when I was 7 years old. And Kampala is near and dear to my heart. It is. Have you ever been?
No, have not.
You have to. You have to. I was at a tenant association meeting at Lafrac City, and I was speaking about being born in Kampala. I was saying, my middle name is Kwame. My father named me after Kwame Nkrumah, the first prime minister of Ghana. And afterwards, these 2 people come up to me. They go, "We're Ugandan."
Yeah, there you go.
We've never seen a Uganda candidate.
Right.
And I joked with them that, I might be the first Ugandan to run in a democratic election in a long time.
Well, you're going to carry little Kampala wherever that might be, probably in Queens someplace.
Because, back home, the votes aren't counted the way they are here.
That's funny. That's good. That's good. So you're mostly here in New York. Where in New York do you consider like your home neighborhood where you grew up?
It's Astoria is my home neighborhood. That's where I have the privilege of representing in the state assembly. I grew up in Morningside Heights. I went to middle school there. I took the 1 train. Back then we also used to have the 9 train to 231st. We'd take the BX10 to Bronx Science. And that was a moment where my New York City just expanded. I was a captain of the soccer team, a captain and co-founder of the cricket team. These were the ways in which I saw not just the Bronx, but the rest of New York City. And it's very funny. I keep meeting Bronx Science graduates, Brooklyn Tech graduates. We all have the same thing in common, which is that we couldn't get into Stuyvesant. and I would get this sense that this is a city that just continues to expand. And I've had that experience, because after I graduated from college, it was in 2015 that I picked up a copy of The Village Voice and saw that one of my favorite musicians had endorsed his childhood friend, Ali Najmi, who was running for city council. And so I would get on the F train, I'd go to 169th Street, I'd knock on doors for Ali. And Ali sadly lost that race. And he told me the story of the day after where he went to a Dunkin' Donuts and he met an uncle there who said, "Ali John, so excited to vote for you." He said, "Uncle, the election was yesterday." And the uncle was surprised. And to me, it was also the story of, if we want to bring our community into politics, we have to ensure that we treat every voter with the respect that a consultant tells you to treat a triple prime voter.
Right.
7 reminders, continued engagement. And so much of my work in local politics has been, how do we bring New Yorkers on the margins into the mainstream? How do we ensure that our city's politics looks more like its people? And I mean that also in the sense of, if you ask a New Yorker, when's the election? They'll tell you November. But we know that the decision ultimately is made in June in the primary.
Sure.
And trying to do both political education and agitation at the same time has been a hallmark also of this campaign, where February 14th, it's not just Valentine's Day, it's also the deadline to change your party registration.
Sure.
So we did a real push to get people back into the party. June 14th is not just the first day of early voting, it's also the deadline to register to vote, to change your location of your registration.
Are you doing a registration push?
Yes, we've been doing it throughout the campaign, and it's been so exciting because you see people, they've been New Yorkers for decades, some for their entire lives, and they've never voted.
Yeah.
And
sure.
and I don't blame them, because a lot of them have felt politics as something that has just disappointed them. They don't see themselves in it. And I've even met New Yorkers, lived here for decades. You ask them, where do you vote? I met a usually you'll hear like Georgia, you'll hear a swing state.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
I met somebody who told me they vote in Los Altos, California. I was like, what are you doing voting in Los Altos?
Right.
This is actually now a swing state.
Yeah.
And what can be more consequential in determining what the future of this party looks like, in whether or not it's a voice of the past or a voice of the future? And that's ultimately the choice we're coming down to, is this generational question of, do we want to bring back the exact leaders who brought us to this point, the architects of this crisis, or do we want a new generation that is fighting for something more than the crumbs that can't feed so many of our neighbors?
Let me ask you about another biographical point. And you knew I was going to do this, but Mr. Cardamom, I want an explanation of this here. Let's get it.
I stand by it.
Anthony might have to beep out some of this. What was this? It's not bad, by the way.
Thank you. Best song in the race. Best song in the race. Look, when Andrew Yang had Gin rap, I was like, we got to bring something back to New York City politics. That is a song that I made under the name Mr. Cardamom, and it's a song that we shot a music video for across New York City.
Yeah, this is on YouTube, so we're showing the video.
You can check it out. We're shooting this in a halal cart, still there, the halal cart right in front of Kebab King. We shot this in Kebab King itself. We shot this on the train. We shot this outside of Hot Bazaar supermarket. I got slapped in that music video. There were about 10 takes. My cheek was quite red by the end of it. We shot this in my high school classmates' parents' apartment in Parkchester. It's the opening of the video. Khan's tutorial was the end of the video.
Yeah.
Boxing gym in Brooklyn. I mean, in many ways, this was my New York City. And it was a song that I wrote in honor and love of my grandmother, who is this incredible woman who's a social worker, who set up a foundation for homeless kids in Delhi, in India. And I had grown frustrated of how often we speak of our elders in a very narrow constraint. Mm-hmm. They are just this one way. And here was this grandmother who, after really her older life, had transformed what she was and who she did. And she was so much more than this quiet, petite Nani, this grandmother.
Right.
And so I took that to an absurd level with a grandmother who just, tells her son-in-law to get out of here.
Good stuff.
But it was a fun time. And you were asking me about my upbringing. At that time, I was telling you I used to take the 1 to the BX10. So at the time when I recorded this song, I would take the 1 to the BX10 to go the other way. Mm-hmm. I would take it to, instead of going to Bronx Science, I would take it to go to Fieldston because I was a tutor. I was tutoring kids to make money to pay for studio time.
Got it.
To record this song. And I remember sitting on that bus and having this feeling that I know many New Yorkers have had, where I was just like, how am I so stuck in my life that I'm literally on the same bus I used to take in high school, but I'm going the other way. I'm going the wrong way.
Yes.
And why can't I seem to break through? And what has pained me as a New Yorker is that this city, it's a city of possibility. It's a city where people come here to live out their dream, but it's one where we're making it such that you can't even afford to take a swing for most people, because if you don't land it, you'll have to leave.
Sure.
And we can't make it a place where failure is the end of your story, because so much of the successes we celebrate are ones that were built on years of failure. We have to make it where you can continue to try. And I was lucky that I was able to do so, but that's something every New Yorker should have.
No, that's a good way to put it. It's an interesting way to put it. And but believe me, there are a lot of us who, are sitting there on the A train thinking, what just happened? What am I doing? Am I supposed to do this again tomorrow?
I know.
Anyway, the subway fare, speaking of subways, it was a nickel from 1904 to 1948. Every mayor during those decades promised to keep the price down, which is a way of saying this current race, talking about affordability, is not entirely new, right? So we talked about buses. You're also, I think, hinging a lot of this on childcare, which is actually bigger, more structural, a much bigger number involved. Hellishly expensive, requires state approval, but we've taken some steps in that direction. Close the loop. If you're elected mayor, how do you sort of round it out and expand it?
I think one of the greatest achievements in local government in recent history has been the previous administration's success with universal pre-K. The de Blasio admin, they had run on that as a promise during the campaign. They had a 3-part campaign in many ways by the end of it. End stop and frisk, tax the rich to fund universal pre-K. And that program has made it so much easier to raise a kid in this city. And we saw a glimpse of its expansion in 3K, although the Adams administration has taken almost every opportunity to hobble it. Whether it's stripping it of its funding, whether it's telling New Yorkers every family that wants a seat will get one, but not saying the family lives in Astoria, they're being offered a seat in Bay Ridge. Right. They're making it unfeasible to actually be a part of. And so what our vision is to look at the success of a city like Quebec, where they implemented universal childcare and saw a 10-to-1 return on their investment, because there were so many more mothers that were entering the workforce than they'd even expected. And so this is, as you said, it's not just a question of funding, it's also a question of infrastructure and implementation. The vision here is to provide this for children as young as 6 weeks and bring it all the way up to children as old as 5 years. And to do this in a mixture of settings. There's the in-center setting, there's also the at-home setting. And ensure that you provide that flexibility, because if you have a one-size-fits-all approach, you're going to lose out on a number of children. There are parents for whom their preferred approach would be that, a trusted relative or neighbor receives compensation for taking care of that child. And there are those who want to send their child to a childcare center. And I think part of this is also an understanding that in order for this work to be done, the childcare workers are ones that need to be paid on the same level as those in the DOE. And that parity, because right now the average salary that I've seen for an at-home worker is about $10.50 or so. Yeah. In center, $16. These are not the kind of wages you can afford. But we've been,
it's interesting you should say that, because we've been talking about it for over a decade now. I mean, de Blasio never got the parity. You could sort of spot them a few years because startup, it was kind of complicated, but it was clear fairly early on that people who were working out of daycare centers were getting grossly underpaid compared to those who were already part of the Department of Education and therefore the United Federation of Teachers, the union. That administration came and left. A new administration came in promising to fix it. We're 4 years later, and there's no fix.
I would say that the Adams administration should be treated on its own in its insincerity in many of the promises that were made and its uninterest in following through in many of them. These are real challenges. There's no question about it. And it's part of why I've been meeting with deputy mayors and commissioners from a wide variety of previous administrations, because in order to actually fulfill these promises, we have to have a team that reflects the best and the brightest, and an approach to leadership that goes beyond what we've seen in Cuomo and Adams, which is, who can I hire that is quickest to say yes? Who can I hire that I will micromanage to the end of their career? Who can I hire that will simply be a replica of myself? And we have an approach of, who can I hire that can deliver this? And that means focusing on excellence, on fluency, and on actually empowering them to do that work. And you can see that in our campaign, like you were saying earlier, that a campaign is also an indication to voters as to how you'll run your government. Our campaign is one that began, we were in an Emerson poll at 1% at the beginning of this race. We are now at 27%. And we have more than 26,000 volunteers. You know, we're knocking New York One reporters' houses and 600,000 other New Yorkers' homes. We've called 200,000 people. This is the kind of grassroots energy we haven't seen in a long time in this city at a citywide level.
And why is that?
I think some of it is the team we've put together. These are an excellent group of people that are now managing more than 26,000 that have a hunger to actually deliver for working class people and that have been able to grow as the campaign grows. You know, if you want to run city government, you have to understand that you will not know many of the challenges you will face. You simply have to be prepared to meet them when they arrive. And it's the same thing with a campaign. You can't hire someone in October that knows exactly what's coming in May, but you can hire them to trust that they will be able to meet it. And it's one thing to excite people. It's another thing to not only inspire them, but to have an infrastructure that can absorb that inspiration and then redirect it back into the city. And, you know, it's even my mother is canvassing. She is a regular canvasser on a Sunday shift. And she's been paired up with a 25-year-old. She complains that they walk too fast.
Right.
And she walks up, you know, the 5 floors.
She identifies herself as your mom? And says,
well, here's the thing.
Yeah.
If the voter says they're going to vote for me, then she whispers, I'm his mother. But if they say they're going to do their research,
very good.
She's not telling them.
Very good. And your mother, by the way, because some people know this, many people don't, is a well-known film and well-regarded filmmaker. The film that most people would know is Mississippi Masala.
Great film.
Right? Denzel Washington.
Come on.
Who you've met.
I wish I could remember it.
Oh, well.
I was a baby.
Oh, okay. So no endorsement coming there?
You know, Denzel? Okay. I came here to make this pitch.
You can close. You can close it out. You can close
John
it out.
Liu, right. Denzel Washington, June 24th.
What's not to like, right?
And I do have to say, you know, with it's been lovely because, you know, the reason I'm alive is Mississippi Masala. That's how my mother met my father.
Oh, is that right?
Yes, she went to Uganda to research that film, which was a film about many things and also one about the expulsion of Indian Ugandans in 1972.
Under Idi Amin.
Under Idi Amin.
Yes.
And she had read a book that my father had written about that expulsion. And she went there to interview him and they fell in love.
Oh, boy.
And if you watch that film and you remember it when the father comes home to Uganda at the end of it, he comes home to this house that is overgrown grass and a cow walking through it.
Right.
That's the home that I was born in.
How about that?
That's where I grew up. And that film is one that I will forever say, greatest film of all time.
Very good, very good. I got to ask you about a couple of more things and then we'll let you out of here.
Please.
You are proposing a reorganization of the NYPD. And just picking up on something you said a minute ago, something that probably doesn't get enough attention but happens to be the reality is that almost nothing ends up on the desk of the mayor of New York City that isn't complicated and hard and couldn't get solved by like 3 or 4 levels of government, right? So the thing that a mayor can do that only a mayor can do is not, you know, cutting ribbons and jumping in the pool on Memorial Day weekend, but is, although you won't turn any of that down, I'm sure, but you know, sort of figuring out really thorny, difficult questions like what do you do with somebody who is seriously mentally ill and homeless and has an addiction issue and is in the subway, which is actually not controlled by the city. So now you've got like 5 agencies involved before anybody does anything for this person. And what mostly happens is they're taken to a 6th agency, Health and Hospitals, treated for 48 hours, and then put back out on the street. You're proposing a reorganization that, among other things, would break that cycle. Tell us about that.
You know, we know that police have a critical role to play in creating public safety. And when I've had conversations with officers on the beat, what I'll hear is a frustration that they're unable to focus on serious crimes because they're being asked to respond to almost every failure of the social safety net. These are people who joined the force to keep New Yorkers safe who are now being asked to be mental health professionals and social workers. And you can see that play out in the clearance rates of these major 7 categories of crime. What we've proposed is to create a Department of Community Safety, one that would tackle homelessness, mental health crisis, gun violence, hate crimes, and victim services. One that looks at a police department that's having to answer 500 mental health calls a day, 200,000 a year, and looks at what was possible in Oregon, where they were able to take on 20% of police calls and respond to them, requiring the police in a very small minority of those cases. And ultimately, it's how do we deliver public safety? How do we let the police do their job? And how do we scale up that which is working? I'll give you an example. Right now, the largest mental health facility in New York City is Rikers Island. There are estimates that about 40% of the incarcerated population has SMI, serious mental illness. It's not just a political failure, a moral failure, it's also a fiscal failure. It costs more than $500,000 a year to incarcerate a New Yorker on Rikers. Now you look at something like clubhouses, best known by Fountain House. These are peer-led, rehabilitative, organizations that provide services to New Yorkers with serious mental illness. We can see the results in these. There are only about 16 in New York City today, where you decrease hospitalization for those individuals by about 45%. You increase employment rates by more than 50%. You decrease loneliness. And it costs $4,000 for a year's worth of service. Mm-hmm. That's about 2 days on Rikers Island. And that's some of my frustration is what you will hear from Andrew Cuomo is in many ways what we already heard from Eric Adams. There's not much of a difference in their vision on this. And if it hasn't worked and we've gotten to this point, why would we then go back to the same ideas again? It's this vicious loop that we are stuck in. And so what I tell New Yorkers is if you are happy with the way the city is today, by all means, vote for the people who want to keep it that way. If you want to change this city, if you want a place that you can not only afford, but actually be safe in and fulfill what Eric Adams, of all people, said in 2021, that New Yorkers need not choose between safety and justice, then this is the campaign for you.
Okay. Is anti-Semitism a serious problem in New York? If so, how would you address it?
It is absolutely a serious problem in New York. I have sat with many Jewish New Yorkers who've told me about the fears that they hold, the fears that they live with. I spoke to someone the other day in Williamsburg who was telling me that they now lock their door. They never did. A friend of mine, just days after October 7th, telling me that going into synagogue, hearing the door open, and the fear, looking back, not knowing who it was. And no New Yorker should have to live with that. And what has frustrated me is we've had candidates like an Andrew Cuomo take a very real issue and weaponize it for purely political ends, talk endlessly about it, but not actually offer much of a proposal for how to tackle it. And I'm proud that of all the campaigns in the race, we've made the single largest fiscal commitment to tackle anti-Semitism by increasing funding for anti-hate crime programming that's been proven effective by 800%. Because we need to tackle this issue not only in our schools, not only in our streets, but all across our city. Because what Jewish New Yorkers deserve is what every New Yorker deserves.
But let me ask you about this again, lifting it up to the level of what can only be handled by the mayor. I remember us talking shortly after the October 7th massacre that led to this entire disastrous war, or this phase of this ongoing conflict. The word genocide, as far as I can tell, is a conversation ender. That there are certain people where if that word is in the conversation, there isn't going to be any further conversation. And I wonder how management of this conversation about the situation over there, knowing that it's fraught, knowing that it's ancient to a certain extent, knowing that it's not necessarily the job of the mayor to solve it, but it is the job of the mayor to make sure we have an intelligent, peaceful conversation about it here. How as mayor would you be doing that?
I would, first of all, have conversations with each and every New Yorker. And I would ensure that I'm in rooms, especially with those with whom I disagree. Because I think for too long we've had this sense of politics where you only speak to those who are already agreeing with you. And what leadership actually looks like is being able to represent all New Yorkers. You can win this race with 51% of the electorate, but you cannot lead this city with that being your constituency. It has to be everyone. And I called that what it is because of the fact that this is a factual determination. It's one that has been made by the International Court of Justice, by leading human rights groups, and by a number of Israeli scholars on genocide as well. And ultimately, it comes from a politics that seeks to be consistent, that upholds international law, And it's why I called October 7th what it was, a horrific war crime, and why I've continued to be critical of the war crime since. Because we deserve a leader that doesn't pick and choose when they recognize the humanity of a New Yorker, but rather applies it to every New Yorker and every person in the world.
You're an assemblyman now and a candidate for mayor, but as mayor, how would you use, I guess, the convening power of the mayor as the only person or one of three people who's elected to represent the whole people to have maybe a different kind of a conversation, not one where you're sort of saying, well, this is what it is, this is what the professors say it is, and so this is where I'm going to go, as opposed to saying, look, there are people who are wounded, there are people who are fearful, there are people who are hurting. How can I bring them together?
And I think it's to what you've said, there is an immense amount of hurt across the city. And I know it doesn't always have to be that way, because we can understand that there are disagreements over policies, and yet they are rooted in a shared sense of humanity. You know, I think of the words of the hostage families who told us everyone for everyone, this universality to the way in which we bring this horror to an end. And I remember also, as a Muslim campaign manager for a Jewish candidate for state senate in Ross Barkan many years ago, taking him to mosques across Bay Ridge, and older uncles coming after Friday prayers and looking at Ross and saying, Muslims, Jewish people, cousins, you know, and there is a possibility. And it's a possibility that New York is a testament to. This is a place where the world meets. And this is a place where we see what's possible. But for too long, we've had a mayor who's refused to recognize that humanity, who only mourns certain lives when you should be mourning all of them. And I think that's what we need, is someone who understands that we can only find this safety and this justice and this liberty if we're willing to find it in each other person, not just the ones we agree with.
Okay. Tell me about your path to victory. You've got, I guess, the 3-week strategy that your strategists, I'm sure, have laid out in front of you. What are you going to be doing?
Well, it starts with the appearance right here.
Yeah, of course. Of course, you start with you decide and help my listeners and viewers figure this out.
I am trying to get inside City Hall. This is my path. What is so exciting about these next 3 weeks is that it just requires of us that which we've been doing. You know, thanks to the support of more than 20,000 people, we've raised the maximum amount of money we can spend in this race, about $8 million. We have close to $4 million still left. And I meet so many New Yorkers who are now hearing of me for the first time because of these ads. But unlike any other campaign, this is coupled with a grassroots operation of now 26,000 people. You know, I went to a canvass in Bed-Stuy the other day, about 300 people. Just that canvass, they knocked 9,000 doors. And that's the difference. You know, you'll have someone who's vaguely familiar with an ad they saw, and then they speak to a canvasser, and it takes what was consideration and makes it commitment. So it's continuing to make the case. We know we have the message of a New York that people can actually afford, of a New York that is no longer the most expensive city in the United States of America, one that goes from being a city of eviction for so many to one of invention for all. And the question now is more messengers for that message.
What should I make of the fact that the polls at least say that you're not doing as well with black voters as I would have thought an actual African American would be doing?
Look, I think the use of the term is misleading in its application to me, but what I've found is an incredible reception when I'm at black churches across the city, and also the fact that I'm running against a former governor who's the son of a former governor. I've met many pastors, reverends, who have told me, I'm with Mario's son. They don't even say his name.
Right.
It's a reflection of the legacy of his father. And what my job is to introduce myself. And, you know, for many months, I couldn't get that opportunity. And now every Sunday is double booked.
Good.
And ultimately, that's why I'm confident that the numbers we see now, they are numbers that are more driven by name recognition. But the numbers we'll see on Election Day, those are the numbers of New Yorkers who want something new.
Are you did something extraordinary, which had never been done, so you're already in the history books, by putting out an ad on social media telling your supporters to give money to one of your opponents, Adrian Adams, and apparently it caused a spike in donations. Somebody just, sort of put a graph on. I hope the graph is accurate, but even if it's half accurate, it was noteworthy. I guess talk about ranked choice and how that plays into this. And is she your preferred number two? Are you all moving towards some kind of an alliance there?
I'm proud to be leading the Working Families Party slate, and Speaker Adams is on that slate, and I've been proud to be on that slate with her for a number of months. And I will admit she is a far better singer than I am. The first time that I heard Speaker Adams sing, which was at the Nan House of Justice, I said, thank God she's not running for mayor. And then a few months later, she dropped
some bars, man.
Yeah, but the bars don't hit the way that she can carry a melody. But ultimately, though we disagree in that each of us thinks that we will be the best mayor of this city, we all do agree that that next mayor cannot be Andrew Cuomo. And we need to ensure that every candidate has the resources they need to make that case and to highlight his actual record. And Speaker Adams joined this race later than many of us did, was facing a much steeper climb, and was on the precipice of qualifying for matching funds. And I wanted to make sure that I did my part to help her do so. And I was so excited to see that she did, because ultimately, many of my supporters, they are looking to understand how best they can defeat Andrew Cuomo. And this is one way. And I haven't made any commitments as to who I will be ranking second, but I have made a commitment that before Election Day, I will share that. Because this is the second occasion of ranked choice voting in New York City. The first time around, there was a lot of fear-mongering in communities of color, in immigrant communities, as to whether ranking more people diminished the power of your vote. I heard many uncles and aunties who told me they bullet voted. Just one.
Right.
And when I would meet them, they'd show me a photo of Eric Adams meeting them in that same spot 4 years ago.
Right.
And they said, now I'm going to vote for you and just you. And I say, no.
No.
I want you to vote for me. I'm number one in the ballot, and I should be number one on your ballot. But then you should fill out your ballot and don't include Andrew Cuomo. And I've been telling people, with the Working Families Party slate, there are now 5 candidates they can put on there. They can put on Brad Lander, Adrian Adams, Eleanor Myrie, Jessica Ramos. This is the ability for New Yorkers' voice to not only be heard, but actually to increase the power of that voice.
Okay.
And that's an exciting opportunity that we have.
All right. At some point, we're going to have to explain this to my listeners, and I'm not sure how we're going to do it. But I guess the short version of it is don't do bullet voting. That is always a mistake.
And one other thing I'd say is only rank people that you would want to be your mayor. I met many New Yorkers who put Eric Adams as their 5th choice, not knowing their vote could actually get down to him.
Sure.
Anybody that you put on your ballot could be getting that vote.
Yeah.
So only keep it to the ones you support.
Okay, very good. Best of luck. We'll see you at the debate. We'll see you out on the campaign trail. Thanks for coming by.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure.
If you want to keep up with what's happening in New York politics and hear more conversations with the people shaping the future of New York and beyond, subscribe to our channel. And let Spectrum News be your resource for balanced, in-depth political coverage, elections, and issues that matter to you.